What if I told you that the reason you cannot truly rest, the reason your body feels tired yet your mind refuses to settle, has nothing to do with how busy your life is or how many tasks remain unfinished? What if the exhaustion you carry is not born from the world outside, but from an invisible grip you maintain on the world inside? There is something happening beneath the surface of your awareness, something so constant that it has become invisible, like the hum of a machine you no longer notice until someone asks you to listen. And in that moment, when you pause and turn your attention inward, you might feel it, a tightness in your chest, a subtle clenching in your jaw, a sense that even in stillness, you are holding something up, keeping something from falling apart. This is not accidental. This is not a flaw in your character or a sign that you're doing life wrong. It is a pattern, and patterns are never coincidences. They are the language through which your inner world tries to speak to you, quietly, persistently, until you finally turn around and meet its gaze. You may have noticed, perhaps only recently, that even when you sit down to rest, your mind does not follow. It continues to move, to plan, to rehearse conversations that have not happened, to replay moments that have already passed. You might tell yourself that this is normal, that everyone does this, and in a way, you are right. But normality does not mean health. It does not mean alignment. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the noise of justification and distraction, there's a part of you that knows this. It knows that the inability to rest is not about time or circumstance. It is about something far more subtle and far more profound. It is about the belief, often unconscious, that if you let go, even for a moment, something essential will collapse. That belief is not rational. It does not respond to logic or reassurance. It lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the patterns you learned long before you had words to name them. There's a sensation that accompanies this state, a feeling that is hard to describe, but unmistakable once you recognize it. It is the feeling of being needed, of being responsible, of being the one who holds everything together. And yet, when you look closely, you may find that what you are holding is not always real. It is not always a task, or a problem, or a person who depends on you. Sometimes, what you're holding is simply the idea that you must hold, the identity of the one who controls, who manages, who does not allow chaos to enter. This identity feels safe. It feels necessary. And because it feels necessary, you do not question it. You do not ask whether it serves you, whether it nourishes you, whether it allows you to be fully human. You simply carry it, day after day, until the weight becomes so familiar that you mistake it for yourself. Carl Jung once observed that the unconscious does not speak to us in clear, direct language. It speaks in symbols, in patterns, in the repetition of experiences that we cannot seem to escape, no matter how hard we try. He called this synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence that points not to fate, but to an inner process trying to surface. When you find yourself unable to rest, when you notice that your body is tired but your mind will not stop, this is not random. It is not a sign that you are broken or weak. It is a signal, a message from the deeper layers of your psyche, telling you that something is out of balance. And that imbalance is not something you can fix by working harder or planning better. It is something you can only address by turning inward, by asking not what needs to be done, but what needs to be released. Jung also spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to meet the world, and the self, the deeper truth of who we are beneath that mask. The persona is necessary. It allows us to function, to navigate social structures, to fulfill roles and responsibilities. But when the persona becomes so rigid that we forget it is a mask, when we begin to believe that we're nothing more than the roles we play, we lose contact with the self. And the self does not disappear. It waits. It sends signals. It creates discomfort, restlessness, a sense that something is missing even when everything appears to be in order. The inability to rest is one of those signals. It is the self reminding you that you are more than the one who manages, more than the one who controls, more than the one who holds everything together. But to hear that reminder, you must be willing to stop, to listen, to allow the noise to settle so that the quieter voice can be heard. In this exploration, I will share with you several signs, several inner shifts that indicate your mind has become addicted to control. These are not instructions. They are not steps to follow or problems to solve. They are invitations to recognize something that may already be unfolding within you. As you listen, you may find that certain experiences resonate, that certain descriptions touch something you have felt but never named. You may begin to reinterpret moments from your recent past, seeing them not as failures or frustrations, but as attempts by your deeper self to guide you toward a different way of being. I invite you to stay with this process, to allow it to unfold slowly, without rushing toward a conclusion or a fix. Because what we are exploring here is not something that can be solved. It can only be witnessed, accepted, and gradually integrated. The first sign is this. You find it almost impossible to be present without also planning the next step. You sit down to have a meal, but your mind is already moving toward the tasks that follow. You have a conversation, but part of you is rehearsing what you will say next, or thinking about what needs to be done after the conversation ends. Even in moments that are meant to be restful, restorative, your attention is split. You are physically here, but mentally, you are always ahead, always preparing, always managing the future before it arrives. This is not the same as being organized or responsible. This is a compulsion, a need to stay one step ahead because stopping feels dangerous. You might remember a time, perhaps many years ago, when you could simply be. When you could sit in a park or lie in the grass and let time pass without feeling the need to fill it with purpose. But somewhere along the way, that capacity faded. It was not a sudden loss. It was gradual, so gradual that you did not notice it happening. Perhaps it began in childhood, when you learned that being good meant being useful, that love was something you earned through performance. Or perhaps it began later, in a relationship or a job where you felt that your value depended on how much you could manage, how much you could handle without breaking. Whatever the origin, the pattern became embedded. And now, even when there is nothing urgent to do, your mind creates urgency. It finds something to fix, something to improve, something to control. Because without that, there is only stillness. And stillness feels like danger. The body knows this before the mind does. You may notice that when you try to rest, your heart rate does not slow. Your muscles do not soften. There is a subtle tension that remains, a readiness, as if you are always on guard. This is the nervous system responding not to the present moment, but to an old story, an old belief that says rest is a luxury you cannot afford. That belief is not conscious. You do not wake up in the morning and decide to distrust rest, but it lives in you, woven into the way you move through the world, the way you relate to time, the way you relate to yourself. And here is the paradox. The more you try to control, the less rested you feel. Because control is not a neutral act. It requires energy, constant energy, to monitor, to manage, to anticipate, to prevent. And that energy is taken from the reserves you need for healing, for creativity, for connection. You may find that even when you accomplish everything on your list, you do not feel satisfied. There is no sense of completion, only the immediate awareness of what comes next. This is not because you're doing something wrong. It is because the goal is not actually completion. The goal, unconsciously, is to stay in motion, to avoid the stillness where deeper feelings might surface. Jung would say that this is the ego trying to maintain dominance over the unconscious. The ego, in Jungian terms, is not the enemy. It is the center of conscious awareness, the part of you that navigates daily life. But when the ego becomes afraid of what lies beneath, when it refuses to acknowledge the shadow, the unintegrated parts of the self, it compensates by tightening its grip. It creates busyness, urgency, control, anything to avoid the descent into the unknown. And the unknown is not actually dangerous. It is simply unfamiliar. It is the part of you that has been ignored, denied, pushed aside in favor of productivity and performance. But that part does not go away. It accumulates, and eventually, it demands attention, not through words, but through symptoms. Exhaustion, restlessness, the inability to truly rest. The second sign is this. You feel responsible for outcomes that are not actually within your control. You worry about how others feel, about whether they are happy, whether they are upset, whether they approve of you. You replay conversations, analyzing what you said, wondering if you should have said something different. You take on the emotional climate of the room, adjusting yourself to keep the peace, to prevent conflict, to ensure that everything goes smoothly. And when something does go wrong, even if it has nothing to do with you, you feel a sense of failure, as if you should have seen it coming, should have done something to prevent it. This is not empathy. Empathy is the capacity to feel with another person, to understand their experience without losing yourself in it. What we're describing here is something different. It is the belief that you are responsible for managing not only your own inner world, but the inner worlds of everyone around you. It is the belief that if you are vigilant enough, careful enough, attuned enough, you can prevent pain, prevent disappointment, prevent loss. And this belief, though it may seem noble, is a form of control. It is the ego's attempt to create safety by eliminating uncertainty. But life is uncertain. People are autonomous. You cannot control how they feel or what they choose, no matter how hard you try. You may have learned this pattern early, in a family where emotions were unpredictable, where you had to read the room to stay safe. Or perhaps you learned it later, in a relationship where your worth felt conditional, where love was given or withdrawn based on how well you managed the other person's needs. Whatever the origin, the pattern became a strategy, and the strategy became invisible. You no longer question it. You simply live it, day after day, until the weight of it becomes unbearable. The body registers this too. You may notice a tightness in your shoulders, a heaviness in your chest, a sense of carrying something that is not yours to carry. You may feel exhausted after social interactions, even pleasant ones, because you are not simply present. You are monitoring, adjusting, managing, and that takes a toll. It drains you in ways that are hard to name, because the work you are doing is invisible. No one sees it. No one thanks you for it. And often, no one even needs it. But you do it anyway, because not doing it feels like abandonment, like neglect, like failure. Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we disown because they do not fit the image we want to project. For many people who struggle with control, the shadow contains qualities like selfishness, indifference, the capacity to say no without guilt. These qualities are not inherently bad, but they have been labeled as bad, and so they are pushed into the unconscious. And when they are pushed down, they do not disappear. They create pressure. They create a need to compensate, to prove that you are not selfish, that you do care, that you are responsible. And so you take on more, you manage more, you control more, in an unconscious attempt to keep the shadow at bay. But the shadow does not want to be kept at bay. It wants to be integrated. It wants to be seen, acknowledged, allowed to exist without judgment. And until that happens, the pattern will continue. The third sign is this: you experience rest as guilt. When you finally allow yourself to stop, to sit down, to do nothing, there's an immediate discomfort. A voice arises, subtle or loud, telling you that you are wasting time, that there is something more important you should be doing, that rest is something you have to earn, and you have not earned it yet. This voice is not rational. It does not care that you're tired, that your body needs recovery. That rest is a biological necessity. It only cares about productivity, about output, about proving your worth through action. And so you get up. You find something to do. You scroll through your phone, you clean, you plan, anything to avoid the discomfort of simply being. This is one of the most insidious aspects of the addiction to control. It turns rest into a moral issue. It makes stillness feel like laziness, like self-indulgence, like something that must be justified. And because it feels unjustifiable, you avoid it. You fill your time with tasks, with distractions, with anything that allows you to maintain the illusion of productivity. But the body does not care about productivity. The body needs rest. It needs space to repair, to integrate, to restore. And when you deny it that space, it begins to break down. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually. You get sick more often. You feel foggy, disconnected. Your emotions become harder to manage. And still, the voice tells you to keep going, to push through, to prove that you are strong enough. You might notice that this guilt is strongest when you are most in need of rest. When you have been working hard, when you have been giving a lot, when your reserves are depleted, that is when the voice becomes loudest. It is as if there is a part of you that cannot tolerate vulnerability, that cannot allow you to acknowledge your limits. And so it drives you forward, even when forward means collapse. This is not strength. This is fear. It is the fear that if you stop, you will be seen as weak, as inadequate, as less than. And beneath that fear is an even deeper one. The fear that if you're not useful, you're not valuable. That your worth is contingent on what you produce, not on who you are. Jung would call this an identification with the persona, the social mask, at the expense of the self. The persona says you're what you do. The self says you are valuable simply because you exist. But the self is quiet. It does not shout. It does not compete with the demands of the world. And so, in the noise of daily life, it is easy to forget. Easy to believe that your worth must be earned, that rest must be justified, that you're only as good as your last accomplishment. But this belief is a prison. It keeps you in constant motion, constantly proving, constantly performing, and it prevents you from ever truly arriving, ever truly resting, ever truly being at peace. The fourth sign is this: you cannot tolerate uncertainty. When something is unclear, when you do not know what will happen next, you feel a rising anxiety, a need to figure it out, to make a plan, to regain a sense of control. You ask questions, you seek reassurance, you run through scenarios in your mind, trying to prepare for every possible outcome. And when you cannot prepare, when the future remains uncertain despite your efforts, you feel a deep discomfort, a sense that something is wrong, that you are failing at something essential. This intolerance of uncertainty is at the heart of the addiction to control. Because life is uncertain. It always has been, and it always will be. No amount of planning, no amount of vigilance can eliminate the unknown. And yet, the mind tries. It creates elaborate strategies, complex systems, endless contingencies, all in an attempt to make the future predictable. But the future is not predictable. It is open, fluid, constantly shaped by forces beyond your control. And when you cannot accept that, when you cannot tolerate the discomfort of not knowing, you trap yourself in a cycle of constant vigilance, constant preparation, constant fear. You may remember moments when something unexpected happened, something you could not have planned for, and it turned out well, perhaps even better than you could have imagined. But those moments do not change the pattern. They do not convince the part of you that believes control is necessary, because that part is not interested in evidence. It is interested in safety. And for it, safety means certainty, predictability, the elimination of surprise. But true safety does not come from control. It comes from resilience, from the capacity to adapt, to respond, to trust that you can handle whatever arises. And that capacity cannot be developed if you are always trying to prevent things from arising in the first place. The body responds to uncertainty with activation. The nervous system shifts into a state of alertness, preparing for threat. This is a natural response, an evolutionary adaptation that helped our ancestors survive. But in modern life, where most uncertainty is not life-threatening, this response becomes chronic. You're constantly in a low-level state of activation, constantly scanning for danger, constantly preparing for the worst. And this takes a toll. It exhausts the adrenal system. It disrupts sleep. It makes it difficult to relax, to connect, to experience joy. Because joy requires presence, and presence requires the willingness to let go of control, to allow the moment to be what it is without trying to shape it into something else. Jung spoke of the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming who you truly are, as opposed to who you think you should be. And one of the central challenges of individuation is learning to tolerate the unknown, to sit with the discomfort of not having all the answers, of not being able to control the outcome. This is not passivity. It is not resignation. It is a deeper form of engagement, one that requires trust, not in the world, but in yourself. Trust that you have the inner resources to navigate whatever comes. Trust that you do not need to know everything in advance. Trust that life, in its uncertainty, is not your enemy, but your teacher. The fifth sign is this: you feel a deep discomfort with other people's emotions, especially the difficult ones. When someone is sad, angry, or upset, you immediately want to fix it. You offer solutions, you try to cheer them up, you reassure them, you do anything to make the discomfort go away. And if you cannot make it go away, you feel anxious, helpless, as if their pain is a reflection of your failure. This is not compassion. Compassion is the ability to be with someone in their pain without needing to change it. What we are describing here is a need to control the emotional environment to ensure that no one feels too much, that no one disrupts the fragile sense of order you're trying to maintain. This pattern often has deep roots. Perhaps you grew up in a home where emotions were dangerous, where anger led to violence or sadness led to withdrawal. You learned that to keep yourself safe, you had to keep others calm. You became the peacemaker, the mediator, the one who smoothed things over. And that role, though it may have been necessary then, has become a burden now. Because you are no longer a child in an unsafe home. You are an adult, and the people around you are capable of managing their own emotions. But the pattern remains. You still feel responsible. You still feel that their discomfort is yours to fix. The body knows this pattern. You may notice that when someone around you is upset, your own body tenses. Your breath becomes shallow. Your heart rate increases. You are not simply witnessing their emotion. You are absorbing it, taking it on, as if it is your job to carry it for them. And this is exhausting. It leaves you drained, resentful, disconnected from your own needs because you are so focused on managing theirs. And the irony is that this does not actually help them. It does not allow them to fully feel, to process, to move through their emotion. It interrupts that process, imposing your need for control onto their experience. Jung would say that this is a failure to differentiate, a blurring of boundaries between self and other. When you cannot tolerate another person's emotion, it is often because that emotion touches something unresolved in you. Perhaps their sadness reminds you of your own sadness, the sadness you have never allowed yourself to fully feel. Perhaps their anger triggers your fear of conflict, the conflict you have spent your life avoiding. And so you try to make it go away, not for their sake, but for yours. But emotions do not go away when they are suppressed. They go underground. They accumulate. And eventually, they surface in ways that are harder to manage, harder to ignore. The sixth sign is this. You have a persistent sense that something bad will happen if you let your guard down. This is not a conscious thought. It is more like a background hum, a subtle tension that never fully releases. You may not even notice it most of the time, but it is there, shaping the way you move through the world, the way you relate to rest, the way you relate to joy. When something good happens, you do not fully celebrate. You wait for the other shoe to drop. You brace yourself for disappointment, for loss, for the inevitable moment when things fall apart. And this bracing is a form of control. It is the belief that if you stay vigilant, if you do not allow yourself to relax, you can somehow prevent the bad thing from happening. But you cannot. And the cost of this vigilance is that you never fully experience the good either. This belief often comes from past experiences where something bad did happen, where you were caught off guard, where you felt powerless. And in response, your psyche made a decision. Never again. Never again will I be unprepared. Never again will I be vulnerable. And so you built walls, not just around your heart, but around your entire life. You created systems, routines, ways of being that minimize risk, that keep you safe. But safety is not the same as aliveness. Safety is not the same as joy. And somewhere deep inside, you know this. You know that the life you are living, though it may be stable, though it may be controlled, is not fully yours. It is a defended life, a life built around avoidance rather than engagement. The body holds this tension. You may notice that even in moments of peace, there is a part of you that cannot fully settle. A part that is always listening, always scanning, always ready to respond to a threat that may never come. This is the legacy of trauma, not necessarily trauma in the dramatic sense, but trauma as any experience that overwhelmed your capacity to cope, that left you feeling unsafe in the world. And the response to that trauma is hypervigilance, the constant state of alertness that was once protective but has now become a prison. Jung spoke of the wounded healer, the idea that our deepest wounds, when acknowledged and integrated, become the source of our greatest gifts. But integration requires that we first acknowledge the wound, that we stop pretending we are fine, that we allow ourselves to feel the pain we have been avoiding. And this is terrifying, because the pain feels infinite. It feels like if you start to feel it, you will never stop. But this is not true. Emotions, when allowed to move, do not last forever. They rise, they peak, they fall. It is only when we resist them, when we try to control them, that they become stuck, that they become chronic, that they shape our entire lives. The seventh sign is this. You find it difficult to ask for help. You pride yourself on being self-sufficient, on not needing anyone, on being able to handle things on your own. And when someone offers help, you deflect. You say you are fine, that you have it under control, that you do not want to be a burden. But beneath this independence is not strength. It is fear. It is the fear that if you allow yourself to need someone, they will let you down. That if you show your vulnerability, it will be used against you. That if you admit you cannot do it alone, you will be seen as weak. This fear is often rooted in early experiences where your needs were not met, where asking for help led to rejection or criticism or shame. And so you learn to stop asking. You learn to take care of yourself, to rely only on yourself, because that felt safer than risking disappointment. But this strategy, though it may have protected you then, isolates you now. It keeps you trapped in a cycle of doing everything yourself, of carrying burdens that were never meant to be carried alone. And it prevents you from experiencing the deep human connection that comes from allowing yourself to be seen, to be supported, to be held. The body knows when you are carrying too much. It sends signals, fatigue, tension, pain, but you ignore those signals. You push through. You tell yourself that you can handle it, that you have handled worse. And maybe you have, but handling is not the same as thriving. Handling is survival. And you are no longer in a situation where survival is the goal. You are in a life where you have the opportunity to do more than just survive. But to do that, you have to let go of the belief that needing help is a weakness. You have to allow yourself to be human, to be limited, to be interdependent. Jung spoke of the self as the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious, and the process of individuation as the journey toward wholeness. But wholeness does not mean perfection. It does not mean being completely self-sufficient, needing no one. It means integrating all parts of yourself, including the parts that are vulnerable, that need support, that cannot do it alone. It means recognizing that you're not separate from others, that you are part of a web of connection, and that your well-being is intertwined with the well-being of those around you. But to recognize that you have to be willing to let go of control, to trust that you will be met, that you are not alone in this. The eighth sign, and perhaps the most subtle, is this. You have lost touch with desire. You no longer know what you want, not because you have everything, but because you have spent so long managing, controlling, responding to external demands, that you have forgotten how to listen to the quiet voice inside that says, "This is what I long for." When someone asks you what you want, you deflect. You say it does not matter, that you are flexible, that you are happy to go along with whatever others prefer. But this is not flexibility. This is self-abandonment. It is the result of years of prioritizing control over connection, safety over authenticity, performance over presence. Desire is vulnerable. It requires that you acknowledge what matters to you, what moves you, what brings you alive. And when you acknowledge that, you risk disappointment. You risk wanting something and not getting it. You risk being seen, being known, being rejected. And so, unconsciously, you stop wanting. You numb that part of yourself. You focus on what needs to be done, what is practical, what is safe. But desire does not disappear. It goes underground. And when it is underground, it expresses itself in other ways. Restlessness, dissatisfaction, a vague sense that something is missing even when everything appears to be fine. The body speaks desire. It speaks through attraction, through aversion, through the subtle pull towards certain experiences and away from others. But when you're disconnected from your body, when you are living primarily in your head, managing and controlling, you lose access to that language. You lose the ability to feel what you want, to know what nourishes you, to recognize what drains you. And without that, you are adrift. You move through life responding to external cues, to what you think you should want, to what others expect of you, but you have no anchor in your own truth. Jung spoke of the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine, and the importance of balancing these energies within the psyche. The masculine energy, in its healthy form, is about direction, focus, action. The feminine energy is about receptivity, intuition, feeling. When the masculine dominates, when control and management take over, the feminine is suppressed. And with it, the capacity for desire, for longing, for the kind of deep knowing that does not come from thinking but from feeling. To reclaim desire is to reclaim the feminine, to allow yourself to be moved, to be touched, to be guided by something other than logic and control. As we begin to draw these threads together, you may notice that all of these signs point to the same underlying pattern: the belief that you must control in order to be safe, in order to be valuable, in order to be loved. And this belief, though it may have served you at one time, is now costing you your rest, your joy, your connection to yourself and others. It is keeping you in a state of constant vigilance, constant effort, constant doing, when what you most need is to stop, to breathe, to allow yourself to simply be. This is not about becoming passive or irresponsible. It is not about abandoning your commitments or neglecting your responsibilities. It is about recognizing that control is an illusion, that the safety you are seeking cannot be found through vigilance and management, but only through trust. Trust in yourself, in your capacity to handle whatever arises. Trust in life, in its unfolding, in its wisdom. Trust in the process of letting go, of releasing the need to know, to manage, to fix, and instead allowing yourself to be present, to be open, to be available to what is. The process of releasing control is not linear. It does not happen all at once. It happens in small moments, in the decision to not check your phone, to not fill the silence, to not offer a solution when someone shares their pain. It happens in the willingness to sit with discomfort, to tolerate uncertainty, to allow rest without guilt. It happens in the recognition that you're not responsible for everything, that you do not have to hold it all together, that it is okay to let things fall apart so that something new can emerge. Jung believed that the unconscious is not just a repository of repressed material, but a source of wisdom, of guidance, of potential. And the way to access that wisdom is not through more effort, more control, more doing, but through receptivity, through listening, through the willingness to not know. This is the practice of active imagination, of sitting with an image, a feeling, a symbol, and allowing it to unfold without trying to direct it. It is the practice of trusting that there is an intelligence within you that knows what you need, that is guiding you, even when you cannot see the path. So what does it look like to begin this process? It begins with noticing, simply noticing the patterns we have been exploring. Noticing when you're planning instead of being present. Noticing when you feel responsible for someone else's emotions. Noticing when rest brings guilt. Noticing when you cannot tolerate uncertainty. Noticing when you deflect help. Noticing when you have lost touch with desire. You do not need to change these patterns immediately. You do not need to fix them. You simply need to see them, to acknowledge them, to bring them into the light of awareness. Because awareness itself is transformative. It creates space. It loosens the grip of the unconscious pattern and allows something new to emerge. You might also begin to write, not to analyze or solve, but to witness, to put words to the inner experience, to the feelings that have no name, to the patterns that have been invisible. Writing is a way of externalizing the internal, of creating distance so that you can see more clearly. It is a way of dialoguing with the unconscious, of asking questions and allowing the answers to arise not from your thinking mind, but from somewhere deeper. And you might begin to sit with silence, not the silence that is filled with mental noise, but true silence, the kind that comes when you stop trying to fill the space, when you stop trying to control the moment, when you simply allow yourself to be. This is not easy. It will bring up discomfort, restlessness, all the feelings you've been avoiding, but it will also bring you home to yourself. It will remind you that you are not what you do, not what you manage, not what you control. You are the awareness beneath all of that, the presence that has been there all along, waiting for you to return. Nothing that has happened in your life is a coincidence. The exhaustion, the restlessness, the inability to rest, these are not signs that you are failing. They are signs that something within you is ready to shift, that the old patterns are no longer serving you, that a deeper part of you is calling you toward a different way of being. This calling is not loud. It does not demand. It simply waits, patiently, for you to turn around, to listen, to allow the process of transformation to begin. If this exploration has touched something in you, if you have recognized yourself in these patterns, I invite you to stay with it, to not rush toward a solution, but to allow the recognition itself to do its work, to sit with the discomfort, to notice the resistance, to be gentle with yourself as you begin to see how tightly you have been holding on. And if you found value in this, if it resonated with you, I would be grateful if you would like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your reflections in the comments. Not because I need you to, but because your voice, your experience, your journey matters. And in sharing it, you contribute to the collective process of awakening, of remembering, of returning to the truth of who we are beneath the masks, beneath the control, beneath the fear. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for having the courage to look inward.